The courtroom at Fort Leyden is so quiet I can hear the clock on the back wall ticking. I am standing at the front of the room with my right hand raised, swearing an oath to a military judge I met 1 hour ago. The ceiling lights buzz overhead. The wood paneling smells like polish and old decisions. On one side of the room, the Army's lead attorney, Major Stillman, sits with his hands folded flat on the table. He looks like a man who already knows how a story ends. My name is Faye Reeves. I have been a combat medic for 11 years. 3 deployments. 2 commendations. More nights than I can count kneeling in the dirt, trying to keep someone's son or husband alive. I do not rattle easily. But standing here with this document in my hands, I feel something close to it. Major Stillman addresses the court in a calm, unhurried voice. The Army's position is clear and unchanged. Sergeant Noah Pike died of natural causes during active deployment. The record fully supports this conclusion. He glances at me the way a chess player glances at a piece he has already decided does not matter. I look down at the document in my hands. It is the original autopsy report for Noah Pike, the one I was never supposed to find. I came across it 3 weeks ago buried in a misfiled transfer packet. I printed it out. I read it 6 times. I memorized every single word. I lift my eyes to the judge. I clear my throat. I begin. Cause of death, penetrating trauma to the back. Noah's widow makes a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life. The defense attorney is on his feet before the echo fades. Somewhere behind me, a chair scrapes hard across the floor as somebody stands up very fast. The judge raises his hand for quiet. When the room settles, he asks me to provide context. He wants to understand the circumstances surrounding Sergeant Noah Pike's death. He wants the night itself. I take one slow breath. Then I give it to him. It was the 14th of March, 11 months ago. Forward Operating Base Harrow, Eastern Sector. I had been awake for 19 straight hours running a fever clinic when the call cracked across the radio. Medic down. Position Delta 7. I grabbed my kit and I ran. Noah was on his back in the red dirt when I reached him. 3 wounds already bleeding through his uniform. His face turned sideways, looking up at the night sky. I remember dropping to my knees and my hands moving before my brain had time to catch up. That is what 11 years of training looks like in practice. I was pressing gauze and calling his name and checking his airway all at once. But even in those first 30 seconds, something felt wrong. Something that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with 11 years of reading injured bodies. The wounds did not fit. Our unit had been taking contact from the North Ridge. That was the reported direction, but the entry points on Noah's body told a completely different story. 1 wound on his lower left side. A second on his right shoulder. The third, the deepest and the worst, dead center in his upper back. A soldier struck from the North Ridge would not carry that wound pattern. Not unless he had his back turned to the shooter. I noticed it. I filed it behind the urgency of keeping him breathing. Then Noah grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly firm for a man losing blood that fast. He pulled me closer. His eyes were open and sharply focused. He had something to tell me, but I did not tell a single person what he said. Not for 11 long months. Major Stillman objects immediately. He tells the judge that the words of a dying soldier carry no evidentiary weight and should not be admitted. The judge disagrees. He tells me to continue. I have thought about this moment for 11 months. I have rehearsed the words so many times they have worn grooves in my memory, the way a river wears through rock. But saying them aloud in this room, in front of Noah's widow and the Army's lawyers and a panel of officers sitting in judgment, that takes something I am still not entirely sure I have. Noah Pike pulled me close in the dirt of position Delta 7, with 3 wounds open and bleeding, and he whispered 4 words. Don't trust command. That was all. 4 words. Then his grip loosened and he slipped out of consciousness. He never came back. I performed resuscitation for 9 of the 20 minutes it took the evacuation team to reach us. He did not respond. By the time they arrived, he was gone. The courtroom does not erupt this time. It goes very still. There is a particular kind of silence that is heavier than noise, and this is that kind. Major Stillman rises and calls the statement unverifiable and inflammatory. The judge tells him to sit down. Then I explain the second part, the part that turned those 4 words from a dying man's fear into something much larger. When I returned from deployment, I filed my full incident report through proper channels. I included Noah's final words in the narrative section, written exactly as he said them. I described the wound locations precisely. I described the directional problem I had observed. When the Army returned my report to me, stamped, archived, and filed, that entire section was gone. Every word I had written about the wounds. Every word about what Noah whispered. My name was still at the bottom. But the words were not there anymore. Major Stillman presents the altered report as Exhibit A. He walks the panel through it slowly and carefully. The wound descriptions are vague. The timeline has been made smooth and simple. My name is printed at the bottom in clean black ink. My signature sits exactly where I placed it. He does this as though the document proves everything is in order. What he does not seem to realize, or what he is hoping I will not say, is that it proves exactly the opposite. Medic Reeves, the judge says, do you recognize this document? Yes, sir. I recognize it as the altered version of my original report. The one I submitted was different. The silence in the room shifts. I reach into the folder I have carried into this courtroom every single day of this proceeding. I remove a worn green field notebook with a cracked spine and water stains on the front cover. I have kept a notebook like this since my first deployment. Every significant medical event I attend goes into it, a private record, separate from any official system, written in the field while everything is still raw and immediate. I open it to the 14th of March. The ink is smudged in 2 places where my hands were still wet from treating Noah. The handwriting is quick and uneven, the way writing looks when it is real and urgent. I had described the wound locations precisely. I had noted the directional problem clearly. I had written Noah's final words with a time stamp beside them. The judge asks to examine the notebook. I hand it over without hesitation. Because this notebook was never inside any official system. Nobody knew it existed. It could not have been touched. And it says exactly what I remember. Inside the notebook, on the page immediately after the medical entry for that night, there is a sketch. I drew it within minutes of returning to the aid station, a rough battlefield map of position Delta 7 showing the squad's positions, the North Ridge, and the direction of reported enemy contact. The judge holds it up for the panel to see. Major Stillman studies it with a careful expression. Then he argues that field sketches drawn under extreme stress cannot be treated as accurate spatial records. He says trauma distorts detail. He says medics are trained to treat wounds, not conduct ballistic analysis. I answer before the judge can speak. Sir, I drew that map because the wound pattern was bothering me. I needed to work through whether what I was seeing made sense with the reported contact direction. I pause. It did not. The sketch shows Noah's position clearly at the front of the formation. The enemy contact was reported from the North Ridge. For Noah to have received a deep, centered wound to his upper back from that direction, he would have had to be running directly away from the entire squad, which the official record specifically says he was not doing. There is only one direction that produces that wound angle at that depth. From behind him. From the southern side of the formation. From the side where our own soldiers were standing. Major Stillman calls this speculation. He says I am a medic, not a weapons expert. He suggests I am confusing grief with evidence. I look at him directly and say, I treated that wound with my own 2 hands, sir. I know exactly where it came from. Major Stillman has spent the better part of an hour working to pull apart my credibility. My emotional state on deployment. The imprecision of field sketches. The possibility that stress and grief distorted my observations of the wound pattern. He is methodical, professional, and has clearly done this many times before. By the time he sits down, I can see two panel members looking at me with doubt beginning to form. Then the prosecutor speaks. Captain Ines Kaur stands and announces the name of her next witness in the same quiet voice she has used all day. Corporal Liam Archer. The reaction is immediate. Two of the Army's attorneys exchange a quick, sharp look. Major Stillman's jaw tightens almost without moving. Liam walks in from the side entrance. He is thinner than I remember from deployment, and he carries a slight limp that was not there before. He does not look at anyone in the gallery. He keeps his eyes on the judge as he walks to the stand, with the concentration of someone who has made a very hard decision and is pressing straight through it. He was in Noah's squad. He was at position Delta 7 on the 14th of March. Captain Kaur asks him two questions. First, does he remember the wound pattern on Sergeant Pike that night? He does. He confirms everything I described, without hesitation. Then she asks the second question. Corporal Archer, were you given any instructions about discussing the events of that night? Liam's hands tighten on the edge of the witness stand. Yes, ma'am. We were ordered not to talk about it. Captain Kaur asks Liam to describe what happened in the minutes after Noah was shot. He takes a careful breath. He speaks slowly, choosing each word the way a person chooses footing on unstable ground. He says that after Noah fell, every instinct and every piece of training told him what the next steps should be. Secure the position. Identify the shooter's location. Call in support. Keep the squad tight. He had rehearsed that sequence dozens of times. He knew it without thinking. None of it happened. Within minutes of Noah going down, before the area was cleared, before a second shooter was confirmed, before the most basic safety checks were made, the order came through. Move. Advance to the next checkpoint. Leave the position immediately. That made no tactical sense, Liam says. Not with a man on the ground. Not with the threat unresolved. The room absorbs this. Then Liam describes the seconds just before Noah was hit. The squad's movement pattern. The direction of noise from the ridge. The radio traffic. He builds it carefully, in order, the way a person does when they have been holding a sequence of events in their mind for 11 months and finally have somewhere to put it down. Then he says it plainly. A shot went off before the ambush even started. Before enemy contact was officially reported. It came from behind us. From our side of the ridge. Major Stillman is on his feet immediately. He argues that no soldier can reliably pinpoint the origin of a single gunshot in an active combat zone. The judge notes the limitation but allows the testimony to remain on record. I watch the panel. Several of them have gone very still. They understand what Liam is saying without him having to spell it out. Somebody on our side fired first. The phrase, friendly fire, has not been spoken aloud yet in this courtroom. The Army's team is working hard to keep it that way. Major Stillman calls it a theory built on shaky coincidence. He calls it the product of shock and confusion in an extreme combat environment. He calls it, very calmly and professionally, wrong. I return to the stand. I open the autopsy report and take the panel through it the way I would walk a student through a patient's chart. I have spent weeks preparing for this moment. I know this document better than the person who wrote it. The entry wound angle is on page 4. Based on the trajectory described in the official report, fire from an enemy position on the north ridge at the log distance, basic physics and anatomy require the wound angle to slope upward, front to back, given the ridge elevation above Noah's position. The actual wound angle recorded in the report slopes downward, slightly but measurably. That is only consistent with a shooter standing behind the victim at roughly the same ground elevation. Not elevated. Not distant. Close and level. The gunpowder residue analysis is on page 7. The residue concentration around the wound edge is consistent with a medium-range discharge. Not a long-range round from a distant ridge. Then I read the last detail I have saved for this moment. I read it clearly, so every person in the room can hear every word. Trajectory consistent with shooter position directly behind victim. The room does not erupt this time. It simply stops. Like someone has pressed a button that halts every sound, every breath, and every movement all at once. The prosecutor calls Colonel Richard Mallory. He walks to the witness stand in full dress uniform, his chest bearing medals earned across a long and decorated career. His back is straight, his chin is level, and he moves through the room with the ease of a man who is completely comfortable being watched. He is the kind of officer who makes a room feel smaller simply by walking into it. He was our commanding officer at FOB Harrow. He signed the original death classification for Noah Pike. He is the reason this proceeding exists and the reason Noah's family spent 11 months believing a lie. Captain Core begins with clean, direct questions about his role, his experience, and his involvement in the events of the 14th of March. Mallory answers each one with a crisp confidence I imagine works very well in other rooms. He says the death classification was based on the medical report and the autopsy summary. He says the natural causes finding reflected the complexity of battlefield trauma assessment. He says my concerns are understandable given my close relationship with the deceased, but that they are not supported by the evidence. He is polished. He is convincing. He has clearly rehearsed this. Then Captain Core glances at me. Before this proceeding began, I was permitted to submit written questions for use in cross-examination of hostile witnesses. Captain Core has been working through them one by one. She reaches the last question on my list. She reads it silently first. She pauses just briefly before speaking it aloud. Neither Mallory nor most of the room is ready for it, but I wrote that question for a very specific reason. Captain Core reads the question in an even voice. Colonel Mallory, where were you standing at the precise moment Sergeant Pike was shot? The silence that follows is different from the others this proceeding has produced. It is not the silence of shock. It is the silence of something being slowly, unavoidably exposed. Mallory's face does not collapse. It tightens. The smallest possible shift in a very controlled expression. If I were not someone who watches people's physical responses for a living, who reads the body the way other people read text, I might not have caught it. I was at the command post, he says. Captain Core looks at her notes. That is approximately 400 meters from position Delta 7, correct? That is correct. Your report states, and I am reading directly, at the moment of initial contact, Sergeant Pike sustained wounds consistent with the enemy engagement parameters established at that time. You used the phrase at the moment of initial contact. How would you know the precise moment of initial contact from 400 meters away, without direct sight lines, at night? Mallory says he was receiving real-time radio updates. Captain Core nods. She then asks him to describe the radio communications at the exact moment of first contact. Mallory describes them. Accurately. The precise sequence. The exact phrasing. The specific timing. And that is the problem. The radio logs were classified as sealed evidence until 48 hours before this session. Mallory had not been granted access to them for this proceeding. The only way to describe those transmissions in that level of detail is to have been there when they happened. The judge leans slowly forward. Captain Core asks the technician to play Exhibit 7. There are no theatrics. The technician simply sets a speaker on the evidence table, opens the audio file, and presses play. What comes out of that speaker is a radio transmission recorded automatically by the base communication system at FOB Harrow on the night of the 14th of March. The timestamp is visible on the screen for everyone in the room to read. The audio is patchy and broken with static, but the words come through clearly. A voice, sharp with panic, stripped down to what matters most in a moment of crisis. Cease fire. Friendly down. Cease fire. The room holds its breath. The timestamp on that recording is 22:41. The official incident report, the one signed by Colonel Richard Mallory, lists the commencement of enemy contact at 22:44. 3 minutes. The ceasefire call arrived 3 full minutes before the enemy ambush officially began. Major Stillman rises immediately. He argues that timestamps on field radio systems are known to drift. He argues that a single recording cannot overturn a thoroughly documented investigation. His argument is technically possible. It is also exactly the argument you would build if you needed those 3 specific minutes to disappear from the official timeline. I watched the panel. I watched them read the timestamp. I watched them look at Mallory. Mallory is looking at the table in front of him. That is new. For the first time in this entire proceeding, he is not looking at the judge or the panel or performing the quiet confidence of a man with nothing to fear. He is looking at the surface of the table. And his right hand, resting on the stand, is perfectly, completely still. Captain Corr informs the court that during the investigation, something was found buried inside the mission logs from the 3 weeks before Noah Pike died. Noah had filed a report. It was not dramatic. It was not addressed to a commanding officer. It went through the unit's internal concerns channel, a system designed for routine operational feedback. But what Noah had written inside it was not routine at all. In careful, measured language, he described a series of things he had personally observed at FOB Harrow. Equipment moving at night without any logged authorization. Supply shipments that appeared nowhere in the official logistics records. Weapons crates going in and out of a restricted storage area that, according to the posted access schedule, was not supposed to be in active use. Noah had not accused anyone by name. He had simply described what he saw and asked for a formal clarification. The report was received. The system assigned it a reference number. After that, nothing. No follow-up. No investigation. No response of any kind. 3 weeks later, Noah was dead. Captain Corr does not editorialize. She simply presents the timeline and lets the room sit with it. I watch the panel working through the dates in their minds. I can see the exact moment when several of them put the pieces together, the same way I put them together when I first understood what Noah had walked into. He had not been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had seen something he was never supposed to see. And he had done exactly what a good soldier does when he sees something wrong. He reported it. And someone decided he could not be allowed to follow up. The technician sets up a small screen near the evidence table. The footage about to be shown was recovered from a helmet camera belonging to one of the soldiers in Noah's squad. It was found 4 months after the incident during a routine equipment inventory at a base storage facility. The camera's memory card had been sealed inside a waterproof casing and had survived completely intact. I have watched this footage 11 times over the past 2 weeks. I know every second of it. The quality is poor. Night vision footage, green and grainy, with the jerky movement of a soldier scanning terrain under pressure. You can hear controlled breathing. You can hear boots on dry ground. You can feel the tight, low-level tension of a patrol that has not yet made contact but knows it is coming. For the first 40 seconds, nothing happens. The camera pans across the north ridge, then sweeps back toward the squad. Dark shapes moving in formation. Routine. Then a single gunshot. One sharp crack. Not from the ridge. The camera's built-in audio indicator, a small directional display in the corner of the frame, registers the sound coming from the south. From inside the formation. Noah's silhouette drops. In the moment before the camera swings away in the chaos that follows, a figure is visible at the back of the formation. Standing perfectly still while every shape around it is moving. Facing the direction where Noah just fell. For less than 2 full seconds. But 2 seconds is enough. I can see the insignia on the figure's collar. I can see the patch on the figure's left shoulder. Captain Corr asks me if I recognize that patch. I do. Major Stillman objects immediately. He argues that the footage is inconclusive. The image is grainy. The lighting is poor. Identifying any specific individual from 2 seconds of night vision footage, he says, is an overreach that no serious court should allow. Captain Kaur does not argue with him. Instead, she calls a forensic imaging specialist who has spent the past 2 weeks working on specific frames from the video using digital reconstruction software. The enhanced prints are entered into evidence. The shoulder patch is visible. Small, with slightly blurred edges, but visible. A black eagle on a red background, the command staff patch worn exclusively by officers at battalion command level at FOB Harrow during that deployment period. Not every officer on base. A specific rank and a specific assignment. Major Stillman points out that any officer at that command level could be wearing that patch. He is correct. But there is something else in the enhanced frame. On the figure's collar, the rank insignia is also partially visible, and the combination of rank, patch, and position within the formation narrows the field down to a very small number of people. Captain Kaur enters a service photograph into evidence alongside the enhanced still frame. She asks the panel to compare them. The room is very quiet for a long time. Then, in the third row of the gallery, I hear a hushed exchange cut off abruptly. I turn slightly. Mallory's aide, a young lieutenant who has been seated there all day, is leaning back in his chair with a face that has gone pale and stiff. He has been watching this courtroom with the careful attention of someone waiting for a specific moment. I think he just realized the moment has arrived. Captain Kaur places a document on the evidence table and tells the court plainly what it is. It is the official death classification report for Sergeant Noah Pike. The document that sealed the natural causes finding. The document that ended every line of inquiry before it could begin. The document that sent Noah's family home with a folded flag and a cause of death that was a deliberate and carefully constructed lie. It is signed by Colonel Richard Mallory. The signature is dated the 15th of March. Noah died on the night of the 14th. The autopsy was not completed until the morning of the 16th. Major Stillman is on his feet before Captain Kaur can say another word. He argues that preliminary field assessments can support provisional classifications. That commanding officers routinely receive verbal briefings ahead of formal written reports. That a date difference of this kind is a clerical issue, not a substantive one. Captain Kaur listens fully. Then she asks one question. Can the defense produce any documentation of a verbal briefing provided to Colonel Mallory before the autopsy was complete, a briefing containing enough clinical detail to support a natural causes classification? The silence stretches out like something being slowly and painfully pulled apart. There is no such document. There cannot be. Because the clinical information that would have produced a natural causes finding never existed in the first place. A fact that the original autopsy report, the one I found in a misfiled transfer packet 3 weeks ago, makes absolutely clear. Mallory classified Noah's death before the autopsy could tell him how to classify it. He already knew what the conclusion would be. Because he had already decided what it would be. Captain Kaur requests that a sealed intelligence file be opened and entered into the court record. There is a procedural pause while the judge reviews the authorization. The file was classified at a level requiring a special court order. That order was granted 2 days ago. The Army's legal team filed 3 objections. All 3 were denied. The file is unsealed. Captain Kaur reads a summary of its contents aloud, slowly and clearly. The patrol on the night of the 14th of March had not been a standard security sweep. It had been designated as a low-profile surveillance movement through an area flagged by internal military intelligence for unusual activity. That activity, the file revealed, was a weapons trafficking operation running out of a forward logistics point, specifically through the restricted storage area at FOB Harrow that Noah had described in his concerns report 3 weeks earlier. The operation had been active for at least 4 months. It involved individuals operating from within the command structure itself. The weapons being diverted were military-issue equipment, removed from legitimate supply chains and moved through the base under false shipping labels. Noah had not simply noticed something odd. He had accidentally walked to the edge of an active criminal network running inside his own unit. His quiet, Careful Concern's report had set off an alarm inside that network. Someone needed that alarm silenced before it could reach anyone with the authority to act on it. Not the enemy on the ridge. Someone who wore the same uniform Noah wore. Someone with access to the storage area, the mission schedule, the radio communications, and the official records. Someone who knew exactly where Noah would be standing that night. I asked the judge for permission to address the court one final time. He grants it. I return to the autopsy report for the last time. I have been deliberate about saving this detail. Every piece of evidence presented today has been building toward it: the wound pattern, the field sketch, Liam's account, the radio timestamp, the sealed intelligence file, the death classification signed before the autopsy was complete. Each piece stands on its own. Together they form a structure. But this is the piece that holds everything else up. On page 9 of the original autopsy report, under the section marked Secondary Physical Evidence, there is a notation that does not appear anywhere in the revised version. During the examination, a fragment was recovered from inside the wound channel in Noah's upper back. A small metal fragment, deformed from impact but structurally intact. It was sent for ballistic analysis. The analysis confirmed it was a military-issue round. Specifically the M193 variant used in standard service rifles. Not the caliber used by opposing forces in that operational region. The enemy rounds documented in dozens of prior incident reports from that area were a different caliber and a different casing material entirely. The fragment inside Noah's back did not come from enemy fire, but that is not the keystone detail. The keystone is this: the specific M193 variant recovered from Noah's wound belonged to a particular production batch. That batch was issued exclusively to command-level personnel at FOB Harrow during the deployment period. Not to enlisted soldiers. Not to squad medics. Not to general unit members. To officers only. I set down the report. I look at the panel. I look at the judge. I look last of all at Colonel Richard Mallory. He is looking at the table. Mallory's attorney opens his closing argument with the steady composure of a man who has navigated difficult courtrooms before. He talks about the limits of battlefield evidence. He talks about the unreliability of traumatic memory. He talks about Liam Archer's limited field position and the technical constraints of night vision recording. He circles back one final time to my grief, suggesting that losing a patient I had fought to save was reason enough to question everything I had observed. Then Captain Kaur begins her response. She takes the panel through the evidence in careful sequence, one piece at a time. The wound pattern. The field sketch. The last words. The notebook against the altered report. The radio timestamp. The body camera footage. The sealed intelligence file. The fragment analysis. The death classification signed a full day before the autopsy was finished. She is halfway through the sequence when something unexpected happens. Mallory says something. Quietly, to his attorney, but in a room this still, not quietly enough. The fragment analysis was never supposed to be in that report. The judge stops the proceedings instantly. He asks Mallory to repeat what he said. Mallory says nothing. His attorney places a firm hand on his arm. But the room heard it. The panel heard it. The judge heard it. The judge calls a recess. When we return, Mallory is recalled to the stand. Under direct questioning from the judge, his account begins to crack. Small contradictions at first: timing, location, who told him what and when. Then larger ones. The structure that took 11 months to build comes apart in under an hour. At 4:47 in the afternoon, the judge orders Colonel Richard Mallory detained pending a full criminal investigation. During the recess that follows the detainment order, I look for the first time in several hours at the gallery. Noah's widow, Cora, has been sitting in the second row all day. She does not come from a military family. She does not speak the language of courts martial or ballistic trajectories or chain of custody. She simply knows that her husband went to war and came home in a casket and that the letter she received used the words natural causes, and that something inside her never once believed it. I walk to where she is sitting. I do not have a prepared speech. I am not someone who prepares speeches. I am someone who keeps notebooks and draws maps and pays attention to the things that refuse to add up, because that is the only way I have ever known how to protect the people in my care. But I had made a promise. Not spoken aloud. Not in those final minutes at position Delta 7 when Noah was gripping my wrist and his eyes were focused and urgent. He had not asked me for a promise. He had told me 4 words and then he was gone. But I made the promise to myself. I made it the moment I understood what those 4 words meant. The moment I saw the wound angles and ran the numbers in my head. The moment I found the original report buried in a misfiled packet at 2 in the morning and felt everything become completely and terrifyingly clear. I sit beside Cora. I tell her that Noah was not careless. He was not unlucky. He was the exact opposite of both. He saw something wrong and he tried to correct it, because that was the kind of man he was. He walked toward the problem rather than away from it. She already knew that. But sometimes the truth has to be said out loud before it fully becomes real. 4 months after Colonel Richard Mallory is detained, the ruling comes down. The official cause of death for Sergeant Noah Pike is amended in the permanent military record. The new classification reads, killed by unlawful use of force during the suppression of a criminal misconduct investigation. It is formal language, cold on the page. But it is the truth, and the truth in an official document is worth every single thing it costs to put there. Mallory is charged with second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy connected to the weapons trafficking operation at FOB Harrow. 3 additional officers face charges of their own. The operation, which had been diverting military equipment through 3 separate forward bases, is shut down entirely. A broader investigation runs for another 8 months. The Army issues a formal statement acknowledging errors in the original classification. A separate letter signed by the Chief of Staff is delivered personally to Cora Pike. I am told she read it alone at her kitchen table, folded it carefully, and placed it in the same wooden box where she keeps Noah's letters from deployment. Noah receives a posthumous commendation for the internal report he filed 3 weeks before he died. The language calls it an act of integrity in the face of institutional pressure. It was. Completely and entirely. I leave the courthouse on the day the ruling is announced and stand outside in the gray afternoon light for a long time. I do not feel triumphant. I feel something quieter and harder to name. Something that settles in the chest and stays there. What I know is this: Noah trusted that someone would listen. I was the someone who could. If this story moved you, if you have ever watched a system try to bury the truth and felt the weight of that, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below. Subscribe, because every single week we bring you more stories about the people who carried the truth when it would have been so much easier to let it go.